Comparative ecophysiology of ferns and frogs. So our organisms were the fern and the frog. The fern is part of the pteridophyte phylum, also known as Phyllocophyta. These tend to be seedless vascular plants that show true alternations of generations. They have roots, stems, and leaves. They reproduce by spores that are developed in the sporangia, and they can be homosporous or heterosporous. And they tend to live in wet climates, mostly tropical regions and temperate regions, although a few live in the desert and the Arctic. Frogs are in the chordate phylum, which means they have notochord, a dorsal hollow nerve cord, pharyngeal slits, and postanal tail. Frogs need to be around areas with water in order to reproduce, but other than that, they're found on every continent except Antarctica. These organisms are very similar. Frogs need to live near a water source to reproduce, and ferns typically need a wet climate as well. They're also both able to live in many different climates and regions, only excluding extreme environments such as deserts and the Arctic. Describe how environmental signals are detected and processed by the organisms. Are there senses that are of particular importance to each organism given their respective environments? So ferns have small openings called stomata, which you can see in the photo. The stomata close in response to the plant hormone abscisic acid, elevated CO2 concentration, and reduced air humidity. The regulation of stomata helps plants with balancing water loss from transpiration and CO2 uptake for photosynthesis. Ferns also have blue light receptors and photochrome, which mediate phototropism and chloroplast movement in the gametophyte. This is very important for survival of the fern as a terrestrial plant that encounters a lot of sunlight. Frogs do not have external ears. Instead, they have an eardrum and an inner ear. This is called the tympanum, which is located behind the frog's eye and appears as a small circle, as you can see in the photo on the slide. Their eardrum is connected to their lungs, and the lungs vibrate and are almost as sensitive to hearing as the eardrum. This allows frogs to make a very loud sound without hurting their own ears. This is important for communication with other frogs. Detection of these environmental signals is crucial for the survival and ability to mate for both organisms. The fern must survive on land conditions in order to reproduce, which makes detection of signals crucial for reproduction. Frogs use loud sounds to communicate with other frogs, so they need to be able to use their tympanic membrane. This is imperative when trying to find a mate for many frogs.
Question 3 asks, what is the trophic level of your organisms? Describe how your organisms obtain nutrients from their respective environments. Trace the process of digestion and nutrient acquisition, and indicate how and where nutrients enter and leave the body of each and what happens in between. Ferns are primary producers, which means they obtain energy from the sun and use carbon dioxide from the air to perform photosynthesis. Their nutrients and water are absorbed by the roots. Nutrients are then dissolved in water in the xylem and are dispersed throughout the fern, and oxygen is excreted as a waste product of photosynthesis. Frogs are from the third or fourth trophic level, which means they're secondary or tertiary consumers. They eat insects and small fish, and food enters through their mouth and travels through the digestive tract, starting in the esophagus, then to the stomach where acids break down the food. The small intestine then absorbs nutrients, the large intestine absorbs some more, and waste is excreted through the cloaca. The similarities are that they both rely on their environment for survival. Ferns need nutrient-rich soil and sunlight, and frogs need plenty of prey to feed on.
Question 4 asks, what type of waste does each organism produce and how is it eliminated? Does the environment present particular challenges or facilitate waste removal or osmoregulation? In vascular plants such as ferns, soil minerals and water are absorbed by the roots, and air, light, and CO2 are absorbed by the leaves. After this is taken in, the plant releases oxygen, which is considered waste from the fern. The oxygen is released into the environment and can be used by animals and other organisms for respiration. Frogs produce a large amount of dilute urine in order to flush out toxic products from the kidney tubules, which you can see in the photo. The nitrogen is excreted as ammonia by tadpoles and aquatic frogs, but mainly as urea, which is less toxic. Urine is known as a powerful plant fertilizer, which can be beneficial, but when there's too much, it can also cause harmful algal blooms, which can deoxygenate the water and cause the death of many organisms in the ecosystem. As tadpoles, frogs eat algae with which regulates the blooms. Frogs also produce carbon dioxide from respiration, which is let into the atmosphere. Frogs and ferns both let out gases that can be used by other organisms. The ferns release oxygen, which can be used by animals during respiration, and frogs release carbon dioxide, which can be used by plants during respiration. Question 5 asks, how do your organisms handle gas exchange with the environment? What structures do they use for gas exchange? The fern has vascular tissue which contains pores that let gases in and out. Air spaces between the cells allow for diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide. The outside of the epidermis is covered with a waxy cuticle that reduces evaporation and covers the outside of the cells. This is important for furs because it allows protection on land from the sun. This cuticle covers the above ground parts of a fern and seals them off from the air, so the stems and fronds of ferns need stomata, which are openings that allow for air movement and gas exchange, which you can see in the photo. Frogs have multiple ways of handling gas exchange. At the beginning stage of their life, frogs do not have a high functioning set of lungs, so the larva will take in oxygen through a set of gills. Adult frogs, on the other hand, have functioning lungs and are able to complete gas exchange with them. This occurs when the frog takes in oxygen through the nostrils where it will travel to their lungs, which you can see in the photo. Although frogs are able to use lungs for gas exchange, they also use their skin. The gas exchange happens through the skin and the lining of their mouths when they're in water and can't use their lungs. This is very important because most frogs live a significant amount of their lives in water. Their lungs are also important because when they are on land and dry out, their skin is not able to absorb oxygen as well. Both the frog and the fern are able to handle gas exchange through their epidermis. This is important because both organisms use their mode of gas exchange to live in the environment that they thrive in. Another similarity is that they both take in one gas and produce another. In the frog's case, they take in oxygen and let out carbon dioxide, and in the fern's case, they take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen.
Question 6 asks us to describe how our organisms circulate and transport fluids containing nutrients and gases throughout their bodies, and to describe how circulatory and transport adaptations reflect the environment in which they live. Ferns transport nutrients and water in their xylem. The water in the xylem clings to the walls of the xylem through adhesion, and cohesion causes the water molecules to cling together, allowing them to move up and down the plant. This transport of water and nutrients allows ferns to grow tall, which optimizes their ability to get sunlight. The cells are free to take in and excrete carbon dioxide and oxygen, respectively. Frogs can take in gases through their skin or nostrils, and they take in nutrients through their digestive system. Both oxygen and nutrients are then transported in the blood vessels in the closed circulatory system. This is all centered around the heart, as seen in the photo. The similarities is that the blood vessels in frogs are parallel structures to the xylem in ferns. The method of fluid and gas exchange allows ferns to grow tall, which optimizes them for their environment. And the method of fluid and gas exchange allows frogs to be amphibians, which allows them to take full advantage of their environments. Question 7 asks us to describe the life cycle of each organism and provide examples of how the environment affects their reproductive strategies. As shown on the left side of the picture, the mature fern is the diploid sporophyte. It undergoes meiosis to produce spores. These spores then begin to grow into the haploid gametophyte. The gametophyte has both sperm and eggs, and for the sperm to fertilize the egg, it needs to swim through water. When the sperm does manage to fertilize the egg, it forms a zygote, which then grows inside the gametophyte and grows into the mature fern plant or the diploid sporophyte. Frogs starts with adult frogs. The female frog lays her eggs in the water through her cloaca, as seen in the picture, and a male frog fertilizes them as they come out. These eggs then grow into tadpoles. Tadpoles eventually develop hind legs, and then young tadpoles begin to grow front legs and their tails reduce as they absorb the nutrients that are stored in the tails. The young frogs are the first to go on land, and they eventually develop into the adult frog and lose their tails completely. The similarities are that both frogs and ferns rely on water for reproduction. Frogs lay eggs in the water and need them to reproduce, and ferns need water for the sperm to fertilize eggs. And they both have two distinct stages of life. Frogs have tadpoles and adults, and ferns have gametophytes and sporophytes. A fun fact is that there's plenty of evidence that frogs have roamed the earth for more than 200 million years, which shows they are at least as old as dinosaurs. Similarly, Ferns were around in the dinosaur times. Dinosaurs used to eat ferns, and they're actually one of the main sources of food in dinosaurs' diets.